Now I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Andrew Steer, to give some more inspiration to us. His last position in the World Bank before taking up the position of the president of the World Resources Institute was the special representative of the World Bank on climate change. And so he knows what he's going to talk about.
Good. Thank you very much, Juha. It's a pleasure to be here. When Juha asked me to speak, he said, look, we've got 3 days of evaluation, so don't talk about evaluation. Talk about something else. So I thought instead of talking about evaluation, I would talk about you, the evaluators. And so the title is Sleuths and Superheroes, because that's what you are. I notice time is going on, Juha, so I will try and cut back what I was going to say, because I think, do you still want to finish at 10:30? Okay. Oh, no, that's fine. I will rush through it. Good. So why are you guys so special? Well, 4 reasons. One, as Chiz has already said, you have an incredibly short window where we can get this right. And that's very tough for you because you have to do things thoroughly. But at the same time, stakes are very high, quite frankly. Imagine we were sitting today with a group of evaluators from around the world on techniques for addressing Ebola. Would it have the same tone as this meeting? It's equally urgent, actually. So that's the first reason why you are not only sleuths, but you have to be superheroes. Second, this is new and difficult territory. Quite frankly, this is very hard stuff. At the World Resource Institute, we do a lot of things associated with evaluation. I see on the front row Heather McRae there, who leads our adaptation work. She's giving a seminar here, or chairing a seminar, I think, Thursday morning. I shouldn't give an advertisement for it, but here, just to illustrate how complicated this is. So think about adaptation. The real impacts are 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And yet evaluation usually stops the day or the year that a project ends. And yet it all happens in massive uncertainty. How are we going to deal with that? This is a very difficult territory that you're struggling with. Third, it's a highly political context. Look, you only have to go to the council meetings of the Green Climate Fund to know that there is politics as well as substance. And you guys, and our guys that work on it, we have to tell the truth, we have to tell it clearly, and we have to recognize that we have precious, precious money and funds and interventions, and they better be used well. And fourth, and this is what I really want to talk about today, is the new ball game. I mean, we're in a very different world with regard to climate change to what we were when the GEF was set up 23 years ago or whenever. So I'm mainly going to talk about the fourth. I'm not going to talk about two, because that's what this whole conference is about. I'd love to talk about the difficult technical issues. I've read all of the abstracts, by the way. I hope you have too, off the website. They're incredibly interesting. But quite frankly, that's just because I'm interested in this. I think there's room for a little more inspiration in the way that some of us write about these things, quite frankly. I noticed one of the topics was entitled Charismatic Carbon. Well, very few of the pages that I read were very charismatic, and it's not really the job of evaluators to be charismatic, but it is to be persuasive. So, look, we're off track, the window's closing, you know that. We've already talked about just this drumbeat of bad news. As Chiz was saying, over the weekend, this is the synthesis report came out. Welcome to the 354th month in a row when temperatures are above the 20th century average. So if you were born after 1984, you've never lived in a month which the temperatures on average for the world were not higher than the 20th century averages. We've got 1 billion people living in low-lying areas, and yet we've got sea level. The U.S. Navy is basing its assumptions on a 1.3 meter rise in sea level this century. $1 trillion so far over the last 30 years but now it's running at $100 billion a year. This is the United States alone from extreme weather events. And you've all seen pictures like this. And so I think it's just important to remind ourselves as we begin this conference together just how urgent and how important it is. And let's remember this above all, that it is the poor who will suffer. And I must say it's fantastic to look across your program and see the sessions on resilience and adaptation, because my goodness me, this is a very, very serious and very painful and very tragic thing that we're in the middle of. So it's not going to get any easier. We're, on the one hand, living in a good news, bad news world. We have this massive growth in GDP, another doubling in real terms by 2030 of the world footprint. If you were born in 1970, the world GDP was 15 trillion. It's now 50. It will be 100 trillion. So the footprint is huge, and the great blessing of people entering the middle class, 1 billion people in the middle class in the world in 1990, 2 billion today, 5 billion, we hope, by 2030. That's incredibly good news. When you enter the middle class, though, you change, you buy a lot more stuff, you eat more meat, and above all, you like to buy these. And so the number of vehicles, I mean, it's just growing and growing. And if people were to buy vehicles the way we buy vehicles, it would be over 3 billion by 2035. Absolutely. So this is going to get harder and harder. There's no doubt about that. You've all seen these charts. This is IEA. These are the various scenarios. They would love to get onto the efficient world scenario. We're not there yet, but this is where we need to be. And we need to peak literally in the next 5 to 10 years. So I want to talk about sort of the new ball game we're in, if you like. The context is so different. I mean, first of all, do you remember those good old days when we used to sort of estimate incremental cost, and we really believed there'd be money enough, grant money from governments, that the amounts of money are tiny. And the concept of incremental cost itself is dying, and this is terribly important. I'm old enough, as some of you are clearly, to have been involved in the setting up of the GEF. And the notion of incremental cost was so intuitive, and it's morally right. You know, it would cost this to do it in the old-fashioned way, it would cost this plus this to do it in the new way, and the international community pays the incremental cost. It was so tidy. Incremental cost means very little nowadays for a couple of reasons. One, it turns out that developing countries themselves are paying it. Why did China last year spend $50 billion on renewable energy? It did cost more than conventional energy. Paid for it itself. It is bearing the incremental cost. But also, with costs changing so much, it just doesn't mean the same thing. So we need a different way of looking at things. What it means is small amounts of money need to be used exceedingly well. I want to this is not a digression. I just want to tell you about something that's happened in the last year. About a year and a half ago, some Europeans and Asians and Latin Americans got together and they said there's something peculiar going on here relating to costs. On the one hand, we're seeing costs decline. We're hearing investors say, actually, you can address climate change without incremental cost. And yet every finance minister we go and see says, wait a minute, we can't afford it. You go I'm from Britain. You go talk to the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Britain. He said, of course I'd like to address climate change. But actually, we just can't afford it right now. We can't afford to be so aggressive. We'll do a little bit. So these governments got together and said, wait a minute, there's something odd going on here. Let's look again at the economics of climate change. And so we were asked as the lead partner to set up this sort of group called the Global Commission. We got President Calderon from Mexico to chair it, Lord Nicholas Stern as the vice chair. In fact, they're the people that are on the commission. Ex-heads of state, presidents of multilateral development banks, CEOs of major corporations like Dan Doctorow from Bloomberg there, and Paul Pullman, and major mayors, Eduardo País, you see there from Rio de Janeiro, from all ex-prime ministers like Jens Stoltenberg, and so on. Whole range. World Bank is involved, IMF's involved, the head of the the International Trades Union Confederation, Sharon Burrow is involved. So a lot of very distinguished people, not environmentalists at all. And we set up a group, the not environmentalists, just economists, serious economists. What did they conclude? They included this. They said, actually, the world economy is in bad shape. It's basically not doing well at all. And it's entirely legitimate that G20 and others want to get a boost to the world economy. If you want to get a boost to the world economy, you need to do three things. Number one, you need to promote more resource efficiency. Number two, you need to get a new boost of technology. And number three, you need to close the infrastructure gap. Then they said, wait a minute, those are exactly the three things that good climate change policy will yield. And in fact, good climate change policy will precisely yield increase in efficiency. Now, I'm explaining all of this briefly because actually it affects the way we look at the interventions we're going to do. That's what I'm going to come on to in a minute. So first, every year that passes, we learn more about what is below the x-axis on the marginal abatement cost curve. There are huge gains to be had in efficiency if we address climate change. Second, there are huge gains to be had in technology if we put the right policies in place. These are it's just indicators of patents for renewable energy. The line along the bottom is all patents. So you see it's just constant, but with policy interventions, you get these massive improvements in technology. And third, and this I want to focus on just for a little bit, it's a complicated chart, but it is extremely important. It asks the question, how much will it cost to move from current approaches to future approaches? And the red bar basically says for the three sectors we looked at, it will be $90 trillion of investment to do it the old-fashioned way over the next 15 years, 2015 to 2030. It will cost more if we move to renewable energy. That's the little blue, the plus 9 trillion. It will also cost a little bit more because for power generation. And the blue one is energy efficiency. The gray one is additional cost for renewable power generation. But you save capital cost from fossil fuel plants. Why? Because you're not using so much because of the energy efficiency. Then you notice that you need less energy transmission because you're not using so much energy, and that's just the small 300 billion there. But then in addition to that, if you do your cities right, you save $3 trillion. So it's complicated, but a huge amount of work has gone into this. So instead of the 89, or call it 90 trillion spend, if you look at the far right, it's going to cost you 93 trillion. So it's a little bit more expensive, but very, very small. But here's the point. That circle at the end says this is just capital cost. In fact, because we're saving on recurrent cost, fuels and so on, we actually are taking another, what does it say, another 5 trillion off. So the total cost of doing it right is less. So this is the point, that in fact it's cheaper to do it right. Now why am I going into all of this? Because the nature of the game for you and us is different now. It is all about changing that 90 trillion. It's not about demonstrating that we've got great projects, that have nice rates of return. Our work is nothing unless it influences that 90 trillion. That 90 trillion, and that is in cities, it's in agriculture and forests, and it's in energy. That 90 trillion has to be changed. So as we evaluate our interventions, we no longer can simply say, well, how much did it cost per ton of carbon or per unit of resilience? The stakes are much too high for that. We now have to ask the question, how much leverage are we getting in a much, much bigger thing? And let me sort of, this is a GEF where, I guess it's your group, Juha. So looking at GEF projects, so local impacts about more than half, limited impacts about 30%, system level impacts only 20%. If we don't have system level impacts moving forward, we are losing the battle. We're losing the war. We'll be winning some battles, but we will absolutely lose the war. So it's that system level impact that is what we need to be talking about in the next few days. Now, let me give you a sort of a suggestion that those of us that have the responsibility of managing climate funds, whether we're donors, whether we're the GF, whether the Green Climate Fund, we have to get more in the psychological and political space. We have to look at the kinds of initiatives that were agreed at the climate summit, and we have to get behind them and push them. And we have to use our resources for that, rather than doing projects around the world according to some, arithmetic formula about who gets the resources. Let me give you some examples, just very quickly, and then I'll close. 5 revolutions for the climate and economy. First, the energy revolution. I mean, it's obvious. How do we play a part of, see the big red one? We're already there. How do we now mainstream that? How do we inject our money to get technology to the next level? These are, I won't go into it, these are windmills, by the way, and it's just unbelievable how technology is improving. How do we use our money to see through this revolution? This is another complicated chart from India. The blue is how much it costs to generate electricity renewably in the United States. The green basically says, well, actually it's cheaper in India because the capital's cheaper, but on the other hand it's less efficient, so it's roughly the same. The red is what's killing India. It's the financing costs in India. So in other words, you can't make progress in India adequately on renewable energy and bring the cost down unless you address the financial system. How are we using our resources to really diagnose the problem and get in that kind of space? Quite frankly, our Green Climate Fund types or Jeff don't necessarily have the ability to really get into that space. We need to develop it. So too, 100 countries now, more than 100 countries, 110 I think, have renewable energy targets. How do we get into the political space of making those really ambitious and really buy? Second revolution, grow our cities differently. The single most important thing that needs to happen in the next 20 years is a different model of urbanization. 750 million people added to the cities every decade at the moment, 275,000 every day. This is the choice. Atlanta, 2.5 million. Barcelona, 2.8 million. Urban area, look at it. Look at the CO2 from transport alone. Transport alone. It's more than 10 times in Atlanta to Barcelona. Houston spends 14% of its entire city income on transportation. Copenhagen spends 4%. So Houston, the mayor of Houston, Annise Parker, who's on the Global Commission, she said, this is nuts. Why would I throw away 10% of my city income? I want to be more like Copenhagen. So she is now introducing bus rapid transit. Can you imagine in Houston, which she's got from Brazil and Mexico, which is amazing. Wonderful south-north. How do we, using the relatively small resources, get in this kind of space, and how do we as evaluators help them, the decision makers, do it? There really is a choice between this and this. There really is. This, which is where we're going now, and this. And the wonderful thing is, around the world, mayors are getting it. The compact of mayors that was agreed, in New York last month, is going to grow and grow and grow. And the greenhouse gas protocol is going to be used to measure city emissions. They're going to make commitments. We're going to hold them accountable. So how do we, as evaluators, think through that issue, a much bigger kind of canvas we're painting on now? So too, these are innovations in transport. I won't explain them all. Massive takeoff of whether it's car sharing, whether it's bike sharing, whether it's smart cards, and so on. I won't go into it. But this is part of that thing about generating technology that makes a difference. How are we going to be part of that? The third revolution, green supply chains. We all need to be in it. But who are our great allies? Well, the supermarket owners. If you got up this morning and showered, and put on makeup and had breakfast, palm oil has already touched you 3 or 4 times today. How do we get in that space? Not only with the good guys like this, but now Wilmar, that trades 46% of all the palm oil in the world, it's now making a commitment. Why? Because now there is a technology that can hold them accountable. We at the World Resources Institute coordinate this partnership with Google and 30 others that now can in real time, this is deforestation taking place in Sumatra, but more than that, we can look to see these are palm oil concessions. These are deforestation that you can see every single month, deforestation. You then can say, aha, they're actually deforesting out of where they're supposed to be. Well, who is it? So we now know the names of all the companies. And what we're doing now with Unilever and others, we're putting in this data into the software they use to purchase palm oil. So in other words, how do we use climate money to inject into that kind of supply chain? And by the way, I think the way the GEF is going about their new signature initiatives is absolutely in the right direction. I really hope that all of us here will support the new direction of the Global Environment Facility, because it is absolutely in the right direction. It's aiming precisely at this kind of thing. Okay, nearly through now. Here's another political revolution as well as a practical one. There are 2 billion hectares in the world that used to be forests. Now they are low productivity, mainly agriculture, but they're not doing anything ecologically. They're doing very little in terms of poverty reduction. They could be restored. We've loads of examples of where it's worked, whether in South Korea or whether Niger, massively positive rates of return. You know, we know how to do it in every agroecological zone, but we need the politics to be right. So in New York last month, it was agreed that 350 million hectares would be regreened by 2030. And all kinds of countries, from the Prime Minister of Ethiopia coming and saying, we'll do 15 million hectares. Paul Kagame in Rwanda will do 2 million hectares. Mexico, Costa Rica, United States coming forward with that. It's a political process. We know the economics is good. We know that it's good for the poor. We know it's good for the environment. Gets back to the point about incremental cost doesn't make any sense in that environment. We have got to get a revolution moving. And finally, how should we use our carbon money in order, our precious resources that we might have the privilege of overseeing for putting a price on carbon? We all know these numbers. These are IMF numbers. $2 trillion. Used to be 500 billion, member, of energy subsidies to encourage people to waste fossil-based fuels. The IMF has now come out and said, you know, the correct economic way of looking at it would be $2 trillion, and that compares with the $100 billion for renewables. Look, putting a price on carbon. Last month in New York, 70 countries, I guess, and over 1,000 corporations said, count us in for a price on carbon, including Shell, for example, said, actually, we believe a price on carbon would be good. How do we, as evaluators of how we should be allocating money, how do we think about what would be an appropriate role? So in all of this, this is a book I just read, by the way. It's a great book. I'm sure you've read it. It came out a couple of years ago, I guess. It's Malcolm Gladwell. It starts with the Bible story and says, you know, wasn't it amazing that David killed Goliath? Well, it then goes on to say, well, actually not. It is amazing, yes, but small people thinking out of the box actually can do this. And he shows how David actually did something that was very smart. And once he'd chosen to operate outside the box, actually it wasn't only God that was on his side, it was actually physics. Science was also on his side, and that's why he beat Goliath. And it talks about how individuals can actually have an impact much bigger than they think. And I guess what I would, as you enter now for the next 3 days, what will be extremely technical and appropriately technical conversations, let's try to remember, actually, that, you know, we've been called to these positions, actually, to change the world and make it a lot better. I've spoken mainly about mitigation, but exactly the same thing, only it's even more difficult, applies to adaptation. Just finally, two slides to end with. You probably wonder, this is maybe a GEF biodiversity project, I don't know, wildebeest. I took my family to Kenya last summer, and we saw 1.9 million wildebeest. This is the Mara River, and they plunge down these cliffs, and they jump into the river, and the crocodile's just there, and they have the time of their lives. And you notice, I mean, it's really very sad. I don't even see that one is climbing back up because it's a mother lost her baby. Loads of them, die. It's really tragic, actually. And the question is, why do they do it? Why would they plunge right down like that when actually there's a perfectly good place to cross the river further downstream where they don't need to do this? And actually scientists don't know, or maybe someone in this room knows. They actually don't know why they put their lives in danger like this. But they think it's because they've always done it. It's in their DNA. It's just what they do. And that is how we're running the global economy right now. We're actually running the economy, like jumping off the cliff, and we don't need to. And what we need to do, those of us who are privileged enough to manage this precious financial resource, we actually have to be helping them to get to the right place. This is just a few hundred, a mile upstream. And they can see where the crocodiles are. They go across. So you see, they're learning. We need to be part of that. And so my sort of challenge to you and us is, in addition to doing the very, very detailed work, let's speak truth to power. Let's learn how to articulate. Let's not think about simply, okay, how is this particular money being used? Has it had a decent return and so on? Let's imagine that we could use this for anything we liked in order to change the world and start thinking about some of these bigger and more engaged things. Thank you very much.